Welcome to today's panel discussion on From Hook to Fork, a missing link in the fish chain, organized by the Fish Market with support from OceanWise's Ocean Bridge program for Canadian youth. This panel discussion is being held as part of Ocean Bridge's National Summit, which will be taking place from March 5th to 11th, 2021. My name is Mirella Leis. I work as Knowledge Mobilization Coordinator with the Ocean Frontier Institute, and I volunteer as an Ocean Bridge Youth Ambassador. For my community service project with Ocean Bridge, I have been working on a mobile application called the Fish Market for reconnecting fish harvesters to local consumers in Newfoundland. I will be chairing the session today with assistance from our co-organizers Adrian Rogers, Ocean Bridge Program Specialist, and Grace Bryson, Ocean Bridge Youth Ambassador. So today's session will run from 6:30 to 8 p.m. We will start with an introduction to our 6 panelists, who will then be invited to share their perspectives on 3 questions focusing on the status quo, current challenges and opportunities related to the availability of and access to locally caught fish and seafood in Newfoundland, as well as elsewhere in the Atlantic provinces. We will then have a Q&A session with the audience, followed by final comments from the panelists. The event will conclude with an announcement of the extension of the deadline for photo submissions to our From Hook to Fork photography contest, and acknowledgements on our partners and ways to stay in touch. So just before we begin, I'd like to just share some housekeeping topics. So we invite you to participate throughout the event by posting questions or comments in the Q&A box on Zoom or in the comments section on Facebook Live. Grace will be monitoring the chat, and we will post questions to our panelists during the Q&A session at the end. Please note that this panel discussion is being recorded and will be available in the Fish Market YouTube channel afterwards. You can see the link on the chat that Grace is going to post for us. And you can contact me in case you do not consent with the recording or sharing of this video. So as we begin this event, we respectfully acknowledge the territory in which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk and the island of Newfoundland as the ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq and Beothuk. We would like to recognize the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Nunatukavut and the Innu of Nitassinan as their ancestors, as the original people of Labrador. We strive for respectful relationships with all the peoples of this province as we search for collective healing and true reconciliation and honor this beautiful land together. So please join me in welcoming our 6 panelists connecting with us from Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, Canada. They represent a diverse group of stakeholders from academia, NGOs, and community-based organizations, local businesses, and the fishing industry, and bring a broad perspective on the issue we're discussing today. Together, we'll discuss access to locally caught and sustainably harvested fish and seafood in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, and more broadly in Atlantic Canada, as well as the implications of the lack of access to it when it comes to food sovereignty, fishery sustainability, and the economy of coastal communities. As I introduce our panelists, let us know in the chat who you are and where you're joining us from. We would love to hear from you and learn what you do and why you're joining us today. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Gabriela Sabau. Dr. Gabriela Sabau is a professor of economics and environmental studies at Memorial University. She holds a Bachelor of Arts and a PhD in economics from the Academy of Economic Studies in Bucharest, Romania, where she was also an assistant professor of economics before moving to Canada. She's currently a professor of economics, as I mentioned, and environmental studies at Memorial University. And she was also between 2008 and 2018 a visiting professor at the West Fjords University Center of West Fjords in Iceland. She's interested in sustainable management of fisheries with a focus on small-scale fisheries and has published widely, including in prestigious publications such as Ecological Economics and Marine Policy. She's also a member of a research network Too Big to Ignore and the Canadian research project Ocean Frontier Institute. So welcome, Gabriela. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Next up is Hana Nelson, who is the founder of Afishionado. Afishionado is a female-run fishmonger that connects local fishers and seafood farmers with fish lovers. They're based out of Halifax, Nova Scotia, and supply sustainable seafood to restaurants and consumers year-round. When Hana Nelson, founder of Afishionado, moved back to Nova Scotia, she realized there was a lack of local seafood available to Haligonians. When she found out seafood is Nova Scotia's biggest export, she was shocked. Hana wanted to help Nova Scotians enjoy delicious seafood their province is famous for, so she started making connections with local fishermen and seafood farmers. As she got to know more people in the seafood industry, she became hooked. So she wanted to share their stories with others and became passionate about seafood by learning about where and who it comes from, and is happy to share everything she's learned along the way. So it's a pleasure to have you here today, Hana. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Our next panelist is Isabella Supizu. She's a senior account specialist with Oceanwide Seafood and has been with them for close to 5 years. She started there as an accounts coordinator in their Toronto office and worked her way up to senior account specialist. And now her role focuses on strategic partner growth for the program within Canada and internationally. She completed her Master of Arts in the Department of Geography from the University of Guelph, and her master's thesis focused on the role of consumers in sustainable seafood movement in North America. Her interests focus on ways in which we are dependent on environmental resources and the best ways to manage those resources to ensure that it can support people through generations. If she could be a sea creature, you would be either a cuttlefish so she could communicate underwater by changing her skin tone, or a whale shark so she could swim and eat all day long. That's a good one, Isabella. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Next one is Jasmine Paul. She's an apprentice fish harvester from Placentia Bay. And she's a fifth generation Placentia Bay fisher who's passionate about small-scale fishing. Oops, I didn't change the slide. Who's passionate about small-scale fishing as a way to alleviate poverty and increase food security, as well as the preservation of traditional fishing heritage. She's also a volunteer with Fishing for Success, an occasional artist, writer, and whatever else she can get up to. I also met Jasmine as part of Food Sovereignty NL, which is a group she's very engaged with. So welcome, Jasmine, today. Hi, Jasmine.
Hi, everybody.
Our next speaker is, Our next speaker is Keith Sullivan. Keith grew up in the small fishing community of Calvert, Newfoundland and Labrador, and was a professional fish harvester for several years before starting as a science program coordinator with FFAW in 2005. In 2014, he moved to his current role as president of FFAW, representing a membership of 12,000. Keith graduated from St. Francis Xavier University with a Bachelor of Science and completed a postgraduate diploma in aquaculture at the Marine Institute, but received most of his education from working with his union, FFAW. He has in-depth experience in fisheries management, research, labor negotiations, and public policy creation. He's a director on several fishing industry boards, advocating on behalf of workers, and he's a supporter of working people and strives to improve their lives and of all members in the community. Welcome, Keith. Thanks for joining us today.
Yep, happy to be here. Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Kimberly Oren, who's the co-founder of Fishing for Success. She's a former high school science teacher turned commercial fisherman and co-founder of Fishing for Success, a nonprofit social enterprise in Petty Harbor, Newfoundland, that is creating a new pathway for the youth of the province to connect with their fishing heritage. She volunteers on her town council. She's the lead facilitator for Project Wet Canada in Newfoundland and Labrador, and serves on advisory committees for Food for SNL, Ocean Frontier Institute, and the Canadian Ocean Literacy Coalition. She has received, she was honored to be recognized as a St. John's YMCA Woman of Distinction. She was also a TEDx speaker and contributed to the 2019 Women's Almanac. She's currently working on a project with Dr. Loeffler on Memorial University to facilitate an accessible network of people and resources called Outdoor Learning and Now. When not teaching others about fishing, Kimberly is probably picking berries with her dog, Annie. Nice. Thanks for joining us today, Kimberly.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
Thanks. So welcome all, and thanks for joining us today. We look forward to hearing your perspectives on today's topic and learning from your experience so we can all move forward together. At this time, I'm going to hand the floor over to our panelists as they answer to our first question. So what is currently preventing local fish and seafood from getting from hook to fork? We will start with Gabriela Sabau. Gabriela, it's all yours if you'd like to share what you think about what you have reflected on in relation to this question.
Thank you, Mirella, and it's really good to be here. So I think that what is preventing local fish and seafood from getting from hook to fork in our province is connected to our obsession with the idea that Canada needs to feed the world with our agriculture products and also with our fish and seafood products. This is coupled with the idea that the market we have is too small, even if we are almost 40 million Canadian now. And I think markets are good enough for this. So I'm not against trade, but I think that trade should be done in a way which protects our interests. So I just want to share with you a bit of early economics, which shows that Adam Smith, the father of economics, he had a theory of trade and development. And he refers in this theory to the fact that whenever you engage in trade, you are bringing to the market the surplus part of the produce of your land and labor, which there is no demand locally. So obviously he refers here to satisfying local domestic market before you head on to export your surplus. Even the latest seafood industry area review in 2019 states that we are focused on delivering quality seafood to the world, which means that we are completely ignoring our markets. So I think that the COVID pandemic has shown us, not only disturbed us, but also shown us that we need to focus on satisfying the local needs of food for our people before we satisfy the food needs of the world. And I think it's really significant, the fact that we have a possibility to do this. Actually, in 2015, the provincial government has broken this foreign trade monopoly by introducing a provision that individuals can buy fish and the restaurants can actually buy fish from the fishers. I think this is a good first step, but still we need we need active support for creation of local fish and seafood markets in the province. I think what Mirella is trying to do is an excellent way of seeing if this can be done and in what ways. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabriela. This was a really good perspective from your background in economics, and it was really good to hear that from you. Next up, I'd like to hear from Hana, if you'd like to share some of what you think about this question.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So my experience will be based a little bit on what happens in Nova Scotia, and I don't think that this experience is dissimilar to Newfoundland. I started the business 6 years ago now, and definitely saw a niche in that, local, sustainably harvested and farmed seafood wasn't locally accessible in Nova Scotia with this place where we produce so much of it. and started over the years to really understand and dig into some of these issues as to why. The number one is really obvious. We're a small population and we have low population density. So, we're not downtown Montreal, downtown Toronto, where you're hitting a lot of different consumers. And the second thing, actually, surprisingly, for where we come from, we don't eat that much seafood per capita. European nations eat a lot more seafood per capita than we do. Americans are a little bit more similar to us, but just getting an Atlantic Canadian to eat seafood once a week is a little bit of a struggle. So when you look at yourself as a grocery store in terms of what are people buying, you're only spending money at your fish shop once a week. So it becomes really difficult with a small population to be able to generate enough revenue to be able to have a business. So that's where the second piece comes in, which is it's export oriented. It's so easy for us to export our seafood to markets that are willing to pay higher prices than we are. That's feedback we hear quite a lot, is that we're expensive. And you go to the grocery store and you can buy Asian fished seafood cheaper than ours. And it becomes really difficult to compete on a dollar to dollar value when people don't really understand necessarily that much about how it works. So, not only are we small population, a lot of areas are economically depressed, so we're not going to be spending a lot on seafood, and we don't eat it a lot. The other thing that becomes really difficult is transportation. Regional transportation networks are quite weak. We catch seafood, a lot of seafood in Nova Scotia, but different species in entirely different regions. It never passes through one central aggregation point. So again, if you're a fish shop, you need to have 10 different species in your shop readily available. Well, if you're in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, you've got snow crab, cold water shrimp, perch is kind of your main. You go to southwestern Nova Scotia, you have lobster, halibut. You go to the Digby shores, you've got scallops, but nothing ever passes through the same point. So it becomes really difficult to look at small regional transportation networks that just don't really exist here. In fact, it's cheaper to get products to downtown Toronto than it is from Cape Breton to Halifax. So transportation costs are higher, makes the product more expensive, or some of these transportation networks just don't exist. And then I think the last one is the willingness of different processors and operators to deal with people at the small scale that we're at. It's a lot more work to send me 100 pounds of product than it is to ship a whole tractor trailer load to the US. And I don't really want to deal with you because I have to figure out the trucking, pack up your small order because there's probably not refrigerated trucking to Halifax. I'm just going to fill this truck and send it to Halifax. So I find, or to the US. So I find the mindset of operators is quite traditional, which is, we're going to bring in as much as we can and we're going to ship it out as quickly as we can. And if locals want it from us, they can buy it directly from the fishermen. I said that was the last point, but there is actually one more point. In Nova Scotia, we don't have a provincial seafood processing regime. So our small business is CFIA certified, which is a whole other level of certification, which is really difficult when you're talking about the scale of business that we're at. But there's no distribution mechanism for locals to be able to access this product. I could keep talking, but now it's everyone else.
Oh, thank you so much, Hannah. Those are really good points. And it's nice to have the perspective from Nova Scotia as well, bringing that into this panel, because I believe there are similar issues there and similar challenges. So thank you so much. Next up, we would like to hear from Isabella. So Isabella, what do you think is currently preventing local fish and seafood from getting from hook to fork?
Yeah, thank you. My perspective is also going to be a little bit different. I work for the Oceanwide Sustainable Seafood Program, which is a recommendation body that recommends seafood based upon certain criteria for sustainability. And we are a program across Canada. I am based in Toronto, so I can't speak specifically to what's going on in Newfoundland, but I can kind of step back a bit and give a little bit of a broader perspective. So I kind of want to touch upon consumer barriers as well as market barriers, which are both things that Hana and Gabriela also touched upon. So as most of you here know, seafood is by far the most complicated food system in the entire world because of its global nature, harvesting from international waters, different labeling laws by different regions, and this can absolutely make it impossible for you to understand even where the seafood you're purchasing is coming from. So in Canada, our labeling laws state that something that's being imported only has to be labeled with the country of last alteration. So you could be purchasing a fillet that's being harvested in Atlantic Canada, but it was sent to China for processing because it's cheaper to do that. So then by the time it's brought back here, legally, the product only has to say product of China. So as a consumer, your ability to understand where your seafood is coming from is hindered because of laws like that. And taking this perspective a little bit broader, having a global marketplace to sell your product allows fishers to sell to the highest bidder, right? So Canada has an extremely excellent reputation for high health and safety standards, which is extremely attractive for a lot of different countries who have wealthy people that want to pay a lot of money for seafood. In addition to that, it could be even more complex, such as Hana mentioned, not having access directly to that market, not having support for marketing to build a market for your product locally, or like international markets, having an already established business relationship that's guaranteed. So there's no need for you as a business to get into the complications of changing where your product is going or marketing it in a different way and investing in doing that because you have a guaranteed person who's going to buy your product every single year. So as a business, there's not as much incentive to do that. And this global system that we've developed can make changing where you want to sell your product quite difficult. And another point, which Gabriela also mentioned, is the laws changed in Newfoundland, but only in 2015. So only 6 years ago did it become possible for people to directly purchase seafood from the fishing community in Newfoundland. So hopefully with time and with panels like this that are illuminating the community and encouraging people to be more connected to their food system will things hopefully change over time.
Yes, thank you so much, Isabella. Those are really good points as well. And it adds to this diverse panel. I'm really glad that we have people from different backgrounds and different bringing very different perspectives here because it all comes together in the end. Thank you so much. So Jasmine, would you like to speak to this question now, please? We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and I actually really like what everyone had to say so far. That's pretty much really similar to what I was going to say, just from a different perspective. So I'm actually going to focus on this little bit of legislation now that was just mentioned that only came in recently. I'm going to drop a link in the chat, so maybe someone could share that with the rest. But the piece of legislation is called the Fish Inspection Administrative Regulations under the Fish Inspection Act. So I've been fishing now for a couple of years, and a lot of people have, I've spent a lot of time talking about why local people don't eat fish, what is the problem, how come they can't access it. So it's kind of been like my focus of all my fish advocacy for the last little while. So I've researched this a lot, and so I was really happy when I finally found the legislation with help from Fishing for Success. So I'm going to just share it in the chat. So past 2 years I've been fishing, and so I've thought about trying with my family, how can we go about getting fish to the people and following this legislation that is put out, because that's what we have to do. So there was actually in reading it, it sounds really great. But when you actually try to go about selling your fish to the consumer based on legislation, it's actually really challenging. And that's for a lot of reasons. So according to legislation, it's only the skipper, so that's the boat owner and the license holder, who can actually sell fish at all. So Apprentice and other crew members can't sell their share anywhere outside of the fish plant. And of course, many of the skippers are older, and it's also a really hard job, and everyone's so busy that there's really not a lot of time to put together a sale and arrange someone to come in to meet you, especially since you can only sell your fish from the wharf. So that's challenging in a couple ways. Firstly, The general public is discouraged from attending, going to wharves because it's a workplace, and especially right now with COVID. So most people just aren't going to go unless they're familiar with people in the town or area, go to the wharf and hang around and wait for a fisherman to come and be like, hey, can I buy some fish? And then if you do get fish, cod, for example, you can only sell it like head on and gut out. So the people then who can buy that are only people who know what to do. And like, it's not like that with other proteins. Like you get some beef in the store and it's already a steak or it's already ground meat. So, you know, that really limits the type of people who actually can go and buy when it is possible. And so communicating with your consumer is also super challenging because where you're so busy aboard the boat, you can't really be taking out your cell phone and calling up people. It's dangerous. You could drop your phone and you never really know like exactly when you're going to get back. And when you get back to the wharf, of course, you have to wait your turn. So if you're going to sell some fish, take personal and sell to someone else, you have to tell the people on the wharf, like the fish plant and the monitors. So you have to wait your turn behind other boats. So it's really inconvenient for the consumer to try to just like hang around and wait on the wharf for someone to like get an opportunity. So you have to have it arranged. So all of that stuff, just the logistics of it is not super great. So yeah, I think the legislation was mostly set up to benefit like restaurants and stuff. So it's super easy for a fisherman to make a connection with a restaurant. But as the casual buyers, it's a lot harder for people to just approach and be like, hey, you know, can I buy some fish? And like was said, it's easier for the fishermen. And like most are older men, they don't have a lot of time. There's limited internet connection. It's hard to like fiddle around and like set up stuff through the internet and like phoning people and all of that. And like where their crew can't help sell it or market it, it's also a big barrier there. So lack of diversity. If there was a more diverse workforce and the workforce had more control over the catch, then people like myself could like take my share and do something a bit more creative with it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Jasmine. Those are really good. And I would like to invite Keith now to share his perspective on this.
Yes, thank you. Yep, I think, no, it's interesting discussion. Should do it every Friday evening, I think. Anyway, so no, it is good. And I think Jasmine had said a lot of, when I was thinking about it, a lot of the ideas that others had talked about, you know, really come to mind. And, you know, first thing I was like, okay, well, do we eat a lot of fish in the province? And, you know, I guess like Hana pointed out, all the stats are like, no, it's hard to understand how we got here considering our culture and history, but we don't eat much fish, particularly diversity. Like I'd say there's one exception. There's you know, it's harder to get the stats on it, but there is a lot of consumption of what we would call fish, cod. I mean, there's a big food fishery and recreational fishery for it, and then there's a lot of what people take from personal use. So all this together is actually kind of millions of pounds. So there's a bit of you know, and people have set up like a lot of local sales. A lot of fishermen do sell that and have done that for a while. But beyond that, I mean, you know, for whatever reason, I think they're already pointed out, some of it is cultural. We don't eat it, and a lot of it is really the accessibility of the fish, which I think people are honing in on the conversations here. So I mean, I think trying to get to the practical stuff after, but really promoting more of the species that we catch is something that we should do. You know, as a part of it is kind of a chicken and egg. Like a lot of local, you know, inshore fishermen don't have access to a lot of different species kind of throughout the season. And at the same time, it's going to be hard if you don't have access to those fish to be able to promote it. So it's a bit of a conundrum that way. And you know, in a position where, like I said, you know, representing, trying to do the best we can for thousands of people and their families. You know, most of our stuff, energy is no doubt looking at, you know, international markets. You know, the vast majority is exported, and you know, I'd say I'm happy to talk about this, but a lot of the time we are exploring the options and issues in the in that market. So again, a lot of the things, like the other note I had here, is the practicality about getting the fish from the harvester. People who are busy, it's unpredictable weather. It's not like you can say, yeah, come down next Wednesday at 10 o'clock in the morning and pick up all your fish. You know, it depends on weather and all types of considerations, whether you'll catch the fish and everything that works. So those practicalities of getting it from the wharf that Jasmine outlined so good does make it hard, and particularly with a small population. You know, it's not like we have a huge number of people to come and get this, but I do think there is an option for it. You know, I think there are possibilities, and that's why when Marella talks about things like an app that can help people try to find that connection and make that easier, you know, because there's a lot of people would appreciate good, healthy, fresh fish if they can only get it easier. And again, the international, like the global chains, I mean, it's you walk into the supermarkets and you see, you know, fish from Iceland or crab from Alaska, you just kind of shake your head. But I mean, that's the international systems for moving around fish, and you know, it's tough to break and it's tough to work with them. And it's always great when people in smaller take on enterprises, find an option to sell to people and make it work. So good on people who are doing that. So I'll stop there for now, but looks like it's going to be an interesting discussion. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Keith. That was really good. Those are really good points as well. And would love to hear from Kimberly now on her perspective. So please, it's all yours, Kimberly.
Hello. I agree wholeheartedly with the points that Hana and Gabriela made about how the Newfoundland and Labrador fishery is designed expressly for export. You know, both the issues in regards to local transportation systems are just not there, and how the fish is packaged and ready to go to get right on that global supply conveyor belt. And so that's something that we really have to tackle, because in Newfoundland and Labrador, we have that added piece that the rest of Canada doesn't have, that, you know, in 2 or 3 days, we can have empty grocery store shelves because food getting to the island of Newfoundland is dependent upon ferry crossings. So really, we have some serious issues that can cause our food insecurity to become really a serious problem, with increasing winter storms and climate change issues coming down the pike, with higher winds and those kinds of issues. So we really need to get a handle on what it looks like to produce more food here and keep it here, rather than bringing in 90% of it and shipping all our fish away. The other thing that I really liked Jasmine taking on and handling that issue about, yes, fishermen can sell from the wharf now, but really, is it a practical legislation piece right now? And so there's so many problems with that. And so Jasmine did a great piece on that. So I really appreciate that. And so there still are just so many bottlenecks in that legislation, and so many regulations and parts to that that still need to be worked out to make that a really practical thing. Because as you said, someone from St. John's is not going to go walking down the wharf, knocking on shed doors, asking any fish today. So it's just not a practical piece. But, you know, if we're talking about food security, it really is a national security issue. You know, you have to keep your people fed. And national security starts in each individual community. So how do we keep people in each individual community fed? And if we're not eating enough fish, and one of the things might be to encourage people to eat fish, people eat what they know and what they're familiar with. And, you know, back in 1992, before the cod moratorium, people were, you know, 30% of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians were involved in the fishery, and now it's less than 2% of us. You know, just over 100 years ago, 80% of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians were involved in the fishery. So we knew about fish and we were eating it then. So we're not eating it now because we're not familiar with it. You don't see marketing on our television about our own fish. We're not selling it to ourselves. And just like our commercial fishermen are aging out, so are our recreational fishermen. And I don't like to use the word recreational because we teach kids to fish, and we don't want to teach kids that killing an animal for food is a recreation. Okay, we teach children that you kill an animal for food, and this is a food fishery. And so really having a real conversation about who can access fish as food, who can access the food fishery is important because, I mean, let's face it, not everybody's going to get involved in the food fishery because, you know, it's brutal out there. It's North Atlantic, it's cold, it's rough, but experiencing it and knowing where your food comes from connects you to it, connects you to that culture, connects you to that food, and you're going to be interested in eating it. And so this is a really important cultural piece to connect us so that food continues to be a part of our culture. We want to eat it. We want to share it with our families. Having education around that food so that we continue to share it at our tables instead of just at Friday and Lent or right before Easter, and make this something that's always part of our food menus. So talking about a food fishery, a subsistence fishery, and what that really looks like, supporting our local commercial fishermen by being interested in what they do at work every day and buying fish from them when we can't get out to fish ourselves is really an important discussion to have so that we start talking about local fish as a way to end poverty and food insecurity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to all panelists who commented on this question. We got lots of different insights here on the different challenges that we have when trying to get fish and seafood from hook to fork. So some of those were connected to how we perceive fish as food and how connected we are to that. So that was very interesting, and also in relation to some of the priorities in terms of having fish as mostly exported out of the Atlantic provinces, and the challenges from the perspective of the fish harvester as well, of selling that fish locally and having that as an additional time and effort they would have to put into it to sell that fish and seafood to local consumers. So yeah, those are some of the points here. And if anyone wants to comment anything else on this topic before we move on to our next question, you're welcome to add anything at this point, or if we have any questions from the audience as well, feel free to start posting your questions to the chat so that we can either ask them now or more towards the end of the session. Okay, so we have a question here in the chat about who is promoting or marketing Newfoundlandfish, and that is for Kimberly, I believe, or to anyone who would like to talk about it. Oh, Jasmine?
I don't know who else does it, but just based on watching television, the only times I see Newfoundland Labrador seafood products or even the fishery and just heritage in general promoted is through the OCI and the aquaculture commercials and the tourism ads in the province. So that, I guess, speaks to how we see fish as like an export product and commodity type of item, like a tourist item, or just a product, and not so much the fish and fishery as like a heritage, or even fish as like friends and kin kind of thing. Because the fish to me is not like a product, it's like an animal, it's food. And so I think that the way that it's advertised does speak to that export kind of push on it.
Yeah, Keith, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I guess the question was who's promoting it. In a lot of ways, I suppose it's for the international market. Some of the bigger fish companies and brokerages around the world, but locally, not a lot of directed promotion. One thing we see, some supermarket change focus a little more on local food, but just generally a very, very narrow focus. We don't have a lot of fish shops, and actually, I know us as an organization, we've done some things to try to promote fish like traceability. Yeah, we had like a this fish, just to highlight the harvesters and who they are. And again, it was a little bit of promoting the local fishery and the culture, but obviously it was outward facing and everything as well. And like Jasmine had mentioned, those tourism commercials, we really tried to get the local fisheries department to say, let's put something in and promote the fishery kind of here. They've done a great job on those tourism ads, but really the fishery specifically wasn't focused on very much. So I think we got a lot more to do.
Yes, thank you. We'll save some of the other questions for the Q&A towards the end. So I believe we can move on now to our next question to the panel, which is, what are some of the implications of the lack of access to locally and sustainably caught fish and seafood? And that could be in relation to food sovereignty, or in relation to fishery sustainability, or to the economy of coastal communities. So what are some of those implications to not having access to locally caught fish and seafood? So we can go in the same order, if that's okay with everyone. So if Gabriela wants to start, please feel free.
Yes, I'm going to start. So I see at least 3 implications of this lack of access to locally and sustainably caught fish and seafood. So first of all, I think that consumers are impacted by this because they are prevented from buying fresh local produced fish and seafood, and they are actually offered frozen fish traveled from China. I don't know how much nutritive value is still left in that type of fish. So I just read a report about the impact of the pandemic, and it's called the Power of Seafood Report 2021. It refers to the fish and seafood market in the United States, but I think it applies to our market also. It shows that during the pandemic, fish and seafood departments experienced a collective sales increase of 28.4% for US food retailers. So this shows that people bought more fresh, 25.9%, and frozen, 35.7% more fish and seafood. Because we all know that during this time of lockdown, people cooked more at home, so they needed to buy more food for consuming at home. But at the same time, I think that this report was mentioning that people seem to be more concerned with healthy eating and of all the protein that is available. They realize that fresh fish is the best one to do. So I think that consumers in the province would be more interested in buying more locally produced fresh wild fish if it was offered. And just an example I want to give you, I made a very simple study with one of my students about what type of fish consumers would want to buy in Western Newfoundland. And it was a very small sample. We could, this was done last year when the pandemic started, but I think it's still relevant. It says that 2% of consumers would be willing to pay more than 50% of the actual price in order to have this fresh and locally harvested fish. Now, this is the first impact I can think of. The second one would be on fish themselves. And I think someone mentioned here that fish deserves to be treated as not being a commodity, but being food and being an animal. And so we cannot manufacture fish at order, even if we believe that aquaculture is going to save us. But I don't believe that that is true. And it broke my heart when I saw the CETA, the text of the CETA agreement. So this is the agreement, the economic and trade agreement with European Union. And in that agreement, I saw fish being listed under commodities, exactly like the cars we export from Canada. And I said, what's this? Fish is food and fish is perishable, and you cannot treat it. We cannot manufacture fish at order how much we would like to. So, and the third impact I want to mention, which I think is really significant, someone mentioned about the very long supply chains that the fish trade, a global fish trade has, which is true. Did you know that fish is the most traded of all commodities in the world, even more than sugar? Because people just export fish and import fish. So well, I don't understand, because for instance, in Newfoundland, I just checked the statistics. We produce 40 species of, we harvest every year, every season, or no, every year actually, because seasons are different, 40 species of fish. What a bigger diversity would you want? Why do you need to buy the fish imported and traveled so much? So I think all this travel and the carbon emissions that come with this, it's a hidden cost that no one seems to consider, besides the loss in the nutritive value of a fish which is no longer fresh and is frozen, and he has been traveled so much over these international routes. So I think that that's another impact that I wanted to mention. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabriela. So now, Hana, would you like to comment on that question, please?
Yeah, my answer is a little bit different, and this was actually one of the reasons that I thought it was so important to start the business and make some of this local fish more accessible to Nova Scotians. And that's because it is our most important resource. We're surrounded by the ocean, and it's an incredibly fragile ecosystem and stocks that we're pulling from. It's the last real wild food source, and it's such a different nutritional composition from everything else that we eat. It's so incredibly important that we get it right. And the supply chains and the macroeconomics that are influencing what happens in our waters is not known to us as Nova Scotians. And I think for us as constituents, as people who live in Nova Scotia, to be more knowledgeable and to demand better harvesting practices, then we have to be aware of it as an industry. We have to be able to go somewhere and meet the people who are harvesting or farming this. We have to be able to recognize something as local and to be able to participate in some of these stories. If we're not, then we gloss it over and continue on with our lives. But and we've allowed this situation to continue happening, where decisions that affect our waters are happening elsewhere by people who don't live here. And I think, that we have to raise the literacy of our whole population in Atlantic Canada around how important this resource is to us, biologically and economically and culturally. And if we can't find places to be able to interact with these stories, then we don't have the knowledge to help ourselves do better, to manage it better. And it's our most important resource. So it's critical that we get it right.
Thank you, Hana. So Isabella, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, definitely. Lack of access to local is a problem because there's so many benefits to being able to support local that you're not going to have. So if you were able to support local, you're able to connect to your local community. And just like Hannah said, like you're connecting to this space and you're learning about this space. You're able to distribute wealth within that community. But it's also important because it teaches you what is available within your region and therefore makes you more engaged and a more aware member of that community. How incredible is it that Hannah was just able to point to different regions of Nova Scotia and say what's there? That comes with the knowledge of being able to understand the landscape of what is around you and really be connected to your food system. So when you don't have access to local food, you also lose that connection to the producer. So you lose the opportunity to really understand why we should care about where our food is coming from. And you also lose out on developing relationships with those individuals and seeing the value behind these things. So this product may cost a certain amount because this human being who is harvesting this product for you that you know personally has costs behind it, such as paying their staff fair wages. It is people that are bringing us things. And I think we often forget that. And so we don't feel as connected to our food systems. And you can use the classic example of a child needing to be told that hamburger comes from a cow because we're so disconnected. They don't make that association, right? It's just something that they buy at a store and then they get to consume. Additionally, you feel more accountable when you're contributing to something more actively. So very much that out of sight, out of mind mentality. The less you know about something, the worse off it actually could possibly be. So the implications of seafood are that much more amplified because of the global nature of seafood and the many issues associated with the industry on a large scale. And kind of similar to what others have touched upon as well, I think COVID has really taught us that a shorter supply chain is actually very important when dealing with a perishable product and when dealing with international networks. So international networks can be great, but when travel is stalled and shipping is disrupted, businesses have demonstrated through COVID that once it's financially acceptable to them, they can adapt and they can find new markets and they can distribute their product more locally. So hopefully this is something that we're going to continue to see in a post-COVID world. A soon to be, hopefully, post-COVID world.
Yes, thank you, Isabella. So Jasmine, it's your turn now.
Okay, so yeah, not only like, there's a lot of stuff's been discussed, like less economic opportunities for local people and like less access to food because of the way that like we have structured the fishery and our export systems. But another thing that is actually really been impacted with the way that the fishery has been changed over the years is the people who can be involved in the fishery, and so therefore the people who get access to the fish and know the fish. So I have a little picture. I hope everyone can see it, but this is me, and I'm 2 or 3, and I'm with some lobster pots. And this is me with my pop Paul. He passed away in 1993, so only a little while after this was taken, but he was a fisherman. And my dad and my mom are fishermen, and I'm a fisherman, and all the pops before, and some of the nans too. So now with the way that the fishery is, like really the only people who can be fishermen are professional fish harvesters, which is great for a lot of reasons. But I'm not just talking about in regards to jobs, I'm talking about in regards to participating in the fishery, because like in the picture, like even though I'm like a little baby, I was still participating in the fishery in some way, because I'm sure I was helping my dad and my mom somehow with what they were doing with the fishery. Like we would always participate in building the lobster pots and like spend time around dad when he was making the nets, and like he had a lot to learn where his dad passed away when he was young. So like going through that and learning together. So he learned a lot off my mom's dad and through other fishermen and all of that. But that kind of experience is kind of really unique to me, and I thought it was like the most mundane thing ever when I was little, and I took it for granted. But now that I'm older and I've been able to meet a lot more people, like I thought everyone's dad was a fisherman and everyone had fish like two or three times a week. So when I like got to meet more people, I learned that it was different, and I wanted to know why. So it turns out that not a lot of people can become fishermen now. Like I can only do it because my parents made space for me, but it would be very unlikely that like a stranger somewhere inside my family would take on a new entrant. Not only would they like not be confident in that person's abilities, they really can't afford to pay them a fair wage. So, you know, like it's really restrictive. Like someone new to Canada really couldn't join the fishery as easily as someone who's like dad has been involved and the dad before that and everything. So I think that is one of the serious implications that have come from the change in the fishery. It's changed from like a way of life and a whole like community effort. You know, there's no community wharf, and to entirely a capitalist driven kind of industrial type thing, which has benefits because, you know, money, but also it's cool for little kids to like build lobster pots and stuff too.
Thanks for sharing that, Jasmine. It was really nice to see the photos and think about the story of you growing up and being involved in the community and how important that is. I'm sure Kimberly has a lot to talk about that too. Keith, would you like to comment on that now?
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, there's so many reasons to be able to, you know, support eat local fish and seafood, and a couple of other people touched on it about the what we saw with COVID this year. You know, just not being able to get access to food. But the other thing we saw is just a spike in all these other kind of protein that we're bringing in. The price of beef in the supermarket now, and you know, it's astronomical, and we saw a lot of people struggling when we have, you know, I have a lot of bias, but I think we have so much better food, protein, fresh fish, and it's not just one species. We have tons of them, and just not been accessible. So I just think it's so much as a healthier, and even though maybe it's expensive, people do have to do a lot of work. It's a tough job to harvest fish, but it still can be more affordable to people than something that's shipped halfway around the world, and that's not just caught off our doorstep there. So I think there's like those health benefits as well, for sure. And again, I think back to there's opportunities there that we miss, and I think I probably had a, you know, similar life to Jasmine growing up. You know, my father and all my family would have fished, and when I was growing up fishing, we're just in a small, you know, 30-foot trap skiff, but we still probably in 1 year got a dozen different species, very small amounts now most of the time, but it was a little bit of crab, you know, we're well, good cod and herring and lobster, a variety of flatfish species. But you know, it was there's people locally didn't eat them. Again, the transportation issue. So you know, I think people are more disconnected, and even if people did want, we'll say where I grew up, a few hundred people did want a feed of some of these species. You know, they could come down to the wharf, and you know, that's definitely not there now. So you know, I think, you know, there is a bit of a disconnect between what people are doing in that business, what goes on around the wharves, and maybe that's sometimes where, you know, people who are fishing don't get the respect from a lot of the rest of the population and everything too. So I mean, it's obviously be complicated, but it'd be great to see way more of our local fish available in our supermarkets, our fish shops, our restaurants, and obviously even right at the wharf if we can find a way to do that. So I mean, I think there's a lot of layers of the implications of not being able to get that locally sustainable seafood. And I'll stop there and let Kim have the few last words on that one, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. And you can go ahead, Kimberly.
So moving right into, you know, just the great thing about coming last is you just get to agree with everybody. It's an amazing group this evening. I started Fishing for Success because I was concerned about the state of the oceans, about climate change, about the future of, you know, our collective children, and what this place was going to be like for them. And I see it, a sustainable and equitable and accessible small scale fishery part of the puzzle of solving climate change. And so it's important to me that that local, accessible, sustainable caught fish be on the menu for everyone, because ocean literacy and understanding what's happening with the ocean starts by getting kids back to the water. And the most impactful way you can do that is by having kids catch a fish and prepare a meal for themselves from it. There are very few opportunities that children have today to actually, you know, prepare food for themselves. You know, we live in this world now where we live in a box, we get in another box and drive to school, and we're in a box, and we're rarely outside. Children spend on average about 15 minutes a day outside. And I'll bet you now with COVID and online school, they're probably not even 15 minutes a day outside. And it really is a human rights issue. You know, prisoners in the United Kingdom were upset about not going outside an hour a day, and they raised it and they get to go outside an hour a day. But our children, you know, we plug them in, and it's contributing to mental and physical disorders and issues and all of that. And so how are we going to have children who invest in becoming scientists or becoming people and adults who are interested in solving all of the big challenges facing us, you know, climate change and microplastics, and the ocean is warming, and biodiversity loss, and, you know, all of these big problems that face us today are all centered on the ocean. And, you know, you're not going to be interested in something unless you're aware of it, unless you learn to love it. And so, yeah, it's like, go out and kill a fish, make food from it, and see how this ocean, what it means to you. And the wonderful thing about fishing is, just like we've all said, it's something that every culture around the world has participated in. So all of our families have fishing stories and fishing recipes. And so right away you can start to connect with people on it. And you know, it's inspired us with art and literature and songs. All you have to do is walk George Street, or back in the day when we could, one day we will. And the music from there was about fishing or going out on the ocean. So children need to experience this. They need to experience it through their food, and they need to know where their food comes from and how the ocean is important to them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. Yeah, there's so many implications to lack of access to locally caught fish and seafood, and this is definitely one of them. The disconnect from and having the fish chain lengthen, and the disconnect between the fish harvester, the consumer, but also with kids growing up not knowing where their fish is coming from and not being involved in that day-to-day activities in the fishing community, and connecting to food and wanting to conserve the ocean. So those are very interesting points. We have a comment in the chat from Janet Heron saying, "Oh my God, let's put Jasmine in a commercial now." So that was a very good point that you made, Jasmine. And I guess you got everyone thinking about growing up in a fishing community and what that was like, and really connecting with that. Thanks for that, Jasmine. And we have a question. Maybe we could ask this now. If anyone who would like to answer to this. So it's from Josh Smee. If you were talking to someone who just moved to Newfoundland and Labrador, got off the plane ferry yesterday, and wanted to get to know local seafood, what would we tell them? Where would we send them? So anyone would like to answer to that?
Well, if you're talking about yesterday, I mean, the seasonality is, of course, an issue. Even the Petty Harbor Mini Aquarium isn't open right now, so I couldn't send them to the mini aquarium to at least look at the fish in the aquarium. Yeah. And we have fresh scallops coming to the wharf now, so so we could put them in touch with some fresh scallops. But yeah, it's a challenge, Josh, and that's you know, and that's frustrating because I spent so many years in Florida where I could go to fish markets right on the wharf and buy a fish, whole fish, and it was, you know, I'd love to have fish markets here where I could buy whole fish once again. So we can dream.
Yes, thanks, Kimberly. That's a good point about the seasonality. I guess you wouldn't be able to find many things coming in just yesterday. Keith, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I was going to kind of start with the same thing. I think I'd be asking that person probably a few questions first, but you know, everything really does have a season, and unfortunately, not a lot of areas we can point people to those really good fish markets where they have good variety, a lot of fresh fish. But there are some examples, and I know just locally here, you know, it's local fish truck. You know, it's they do a lot of business. They do source a lot of local fish, and they have it fresh. They do, I mean, a pretty good job of it, I would say. I'd like to see more of it. So there are some options. It's just we'd love to see more of it. So yeah, we'd like to have better answers for that person hopping off the ferry. But I think we could still manage to hook them up with a little bit of good fish.
Yes, that's a good point. And I've been in touch as well with Christine Power from Good Water Seafoods. That's also a really good source of seafood now, especially going to the farmers market. So she always has some smoked and bottled fish and seafood there here in St. John's. So there's definitely places to go. But as Keith mentioned, it would be good to have more options and more availability. So now we can move on to our final question for the panel. So what are you or your organization doing or suggest doing to increase access to locally caught fish and seafood? And what would be the benefits once that is achieved? So Gabriela, if you'd like to start, please.
Yes, I want to start, and I think I have 3 suggestions for increasing the access of consumers to locally caught seafood. And I think the first one is we need more transparency. And I think we can use technology to make visible the landing sites and the amount of landed fish daily. And I'm referring here to an example from Iceland. I did teach for 10 years in Iceland, so I'm pretty familiar with their fisheries and what they are doing there. So Iceland has such an electronic system. It's like a fish stock market, which displays every day the amount of fish caught on the island on all landing sites. This way, consumers can access any place. They know exactly what fish has been harvested, what amount, and then they can get in touch with the harvesters and they can get the fish they need. So I think such a system would work in Newfoundland. And I think what Mirella is trying to do now, connecting harvesters with consumers with the app she's developing, I think it's a right thing to do. Another suggestion, I think, we need to open more brick and stone fish markets in the province. And I don't buy into the idea that the market is too small. In Iceland, the place I was teaching in, Isafjordur, has 3,000 inhabitants, and they have a fish market. And every day, when I finished teaching at the school, I would walk to the wharf and get into the fish market. It was a very small fish market, but every day I would get fresh fish. So boats were stopped stopping at the wharf and get the fishmonger would get the fish, and he was processing a very simple type of processing. But I learned from him a lot of things about the fish species and everything. He would recommend what I should buy, what was really fresh and good. So I love to see something like this happen in Newfoundland. I checked recently. At this point, there are only 13 retail fish and seafood establishments in the province. I think we should have 400. Why only 13? And we know that the province has a plan to increase food self-sufficiency from 10% to 20% by 2022. So what better way than having these little stores where we could get our fresh fish and get to know the fishmongers. I think is so important. What they are doing for us is amazing, and I want to see them, and I want to talk to them, and I want to tell them how much I appreciate their going into the sea and sometimes in very inclement weather, and do this for us just to feed us with the fish. The third suggestion would be that we badly need a campaign promoting Newfoundland fish and seafood menus on TV, but in our restaurants, in our schools, in our hospitals. I remember when I did some research in Costa Rica, every day in the small university I was doing my research, every day on the cafeteria, you would have a special seafood, fish and seafood menu for students. It was $1.50 in our money, very cheap, available to students who definitely need good protein in order to function properly in schools. And why not consider that our good fresh fish could go into this? So I think that that would be an awesome way to connect, or to have a market, because we say, oh, the market is too small. But if you consider all these arrangements that can be done within the province, I think we can do that. And I fondly remember that when I came to Newfoundland, there was a small fish store in Corner Brook. It was Allen Fisheries had a very small fish store, and I would be going even twice a week to get fresh fish from them, and I was so happy. Now, why don't we see Berry Group open a fish store in Newfoundland? In Western Newfoundland or in Corner Brook, instead of just exporting everything, I think they should be giving back to the community. I think that fish belongs to you and belongs to me and belongs to everyone else. So why would we have just one big corporation making money out of our fish and not giving back to the community? So I know this is an important question, and I think we should be asking it to the government to regulate this. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriela. Those are really good suggestions and really good points you raised based on your experience in Iceland and Costa Rica and so many different contexts. So Hana, would you like to follow up on that?
A couple things for me specifically. One is getting people comfortable with the quality associated with frozen seafood. That helps our supply chains. We can bring in bigger volumes of product and always have it here accessible for retail. So when somebody comes in, you can kind of spread out your seasons that way. But there's a consumer perception around fish that fresh is superior, which is a conception born not out of fact and quality. That's where a lot of education needs to happen, because it makes my business so much easier if we're selling high quality frozen seafood. And if everybody just bought high quality frozen seafood, we'd have less waste, our business would be more streamlined, and we'd be able to do, you know, a lot more. So I find that mentality certainly needs to be adapted to current conditions and how well we freeze products these days. And secondly, so for us in our business, we've had a monthly subscription program and an online store now for several years, which was a great benefit to have that already running for the pandemic. So we actually got a little bit crazy during the pandemic. Things were moving because we partnered with some other primary food producers. But e-commerce and online is the way to do it. And I think certainly, you get those people who say, "Oh, I forgot to visit your shop, or I'd love to get seafood from you, but this and this." And there's programs now that we can use to get people into that mentality. So for us in Halifax, you can sign up to a couple of our box programs and get 4 pounds of seafood delivered to you once a month. We're moving it all directly to your door, to make it easy to get your monthly supply from one place. And that, for me, when we started doing it 3.5 years ago now, we were able to put a lot more volume into one delivery day than we were being open 6 days a week. So it was the way to be able to get accessible seafood to locals, but also to be buying enough from suppliers that they cared enough to be able to sell it to you in that volume. And then, as you buy higher volumes, then some of the logistics start to make more sense. So I certainly think that consumer habits and preferences are changing around buying things online and getting people into a monthly program. So you kind of streamline the amount of work that you're doing and get them to get it all at once. And you have a lot stronger traceability that way. One thing that we did pretty early on was invest in a really good label maker, so that every single piece of fish that goes into our program, it says where it was caught, how it was caught, and as much information as possible, so that it is much more transparent than things that they're getting in the grocery store. And I think that was something important that we tackled, so that we could help transmit those messages. But those are two things that have worked for us here, which is move everything frozen and try to only do it monthly with a larger variety of products, so that you can appeal to consumer preferences.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your experience, Hannah. That's really good to have a perspective on how those things work there in Halifax, and how it could potentially work in other places as well. So Isabella, it's all yours now.
Thank you. So I can kind of speak to what the Oceanwide Seafood Program is doing across Canada to increase access to local as well as sustainable seafood. So our program, we're a recommendation body. Our purpose to exist is to make access to sustainable seafood a simple and easy choice. And oftentimes, and more increasingly, that also involves giving chefs and our partners the option to find local sustainable options. So we've established a network of partners, from suppliers and producers right here in Newfoundland to retailers, chefs, caterers, fishmongers, culinary schools. And we have a network of about 3,000 business locations across Canada. And we want to make the producer that's selling the sustainable seafood to the supplier who is promoting that sustainable seafood to the chef who is buying that sustainable seafood, down to the consumer who's able to see that that's a sustainable choice, all through the association of the Oceanwide Seafood Program. So part of our work involves updating our partners every month on changes to our seafood recommendations, which are science-based. And so partners are consistently learning about different sustainable options that are available to them. And on our team, we also have a group of scientists that write small-scale Canadian fisheries assessments. And these allow us to get the information to determine if something can be a sustainable option in Canada, and then we can promote that to our partners using the most relevant science. So a few examples. In BC, we did a small-scale fisheries assessment on gooseneck barnacles. In Atlantic Canada, we did a small-scale assessment on rock crab that came from the Bell River. And now that's something that a lot of our partners are able to promote and celebrate as a sustainable seafood option, and a lot of our chefs carry it in their restaurants. So doing work like this allows us to connect fisheries directly to our partner network, and our partners can confidently purchase and promote sustainable Canadian options. But in addition to working within our own network of partners, we also want to spread the word further on the importance of sustainability by doing different types of culinary as well as media events or even public events. So speaking specifically in Ontario, I'll give you an example of a really fantastic collaboration that we did here for supporting local lakefish. So there's this really amazing program in Ontario called Feast On. They are a program that partners with restaurants based upon a percentage of everything that they have having to come specifically from Ontario. So very much celebrating the local food community in every possible aspect, not just through seafood. And we did an event called Fish Stock where we brought a bunch of chefs from Ontario to a fish farm to learn about the process of sustainable fish farming in Ontario, as well as we brought in someone from the DFO to speak about the history of lakefish in Ontario. Everyone thinks we live in Toronto, or I live in Toronto, that we are very much a landlocked province, but we have one of the world's largest freshwater fisheries here. So we also have a lot of local options available to us that are sustainable. And in terms of solutions, I think it sounds like consumer education is a really big element that many of you have spoken to. And I think events and also encouraging and supporting the culinary community to really celebrate the food that's being produced in Newfoundland is another really excellent way, not only to connect and educate people on food, but to inspire them to really, really care about it. Like, the reason why we work so closely with chefs is because they're so passionate and they're really able to communicate and tell those stories. So I think that that's a really key piece that can hopefully help Newfoundland, but I think there's also a lot of other layers that need to be addressed as well.
Yeah, thanks, Isabella. That's a really good perspective from Oceanwide Seafood and all the work you've been doing. That's very impressive too. Jasmine, you're up next.
Well, I'm only just me, so there's no real organization or anything like that. So what I've been doing personally to try to, get more people interested in the fishery and get more people eating fish, most importantly, and get, that will bring a lot of stuff like respect for the fish and all that, is I'm mostly working towards becoming skipper and taking over, hopefully, my family's fishing enterprise when my parents are ready to retire. And the reason I had that goal is because as skipper, I'll have more control over the catch. So if I don't want to sell everything directly to a plant, I don't have to. I don't have any freedom right now as an apprentice. Like, I get my share paid through the fish plant. I'm not technically employed by the enterprise, so I have to sell to them. I can't take a share and say, well, this is personal, and then go and sell it to my friends, like, or even like on the side of the road. Is like not allowed. It's like a violation, and you can't really do much processing on the types of fish that you want to sell, and like mollusks and crustaceans have to be kept alive and stuff too. So that's like complicated. So I'm focused on that, and as well, I pretty much like just spend a lot of my time researching all of the regulations and history of the fishery, like what's current and what's changed, talking to as many other fisher people as I can to get their perspective, and also just talking to anyone who listened to me. Like, I spend a lot of time on my Twitter account. I teach anyone about the fishery. So if I come up or see something around the house and I'm like, hey, that's a cool fishing thing, I'll like make a little video or picture and tell about it. And I try to share as much pictures from out and boat as I can safely do. And so people can get an idea of what it's like to be a small boat inshore fisherman. And like, also really want to kind of change and challenge people's perception of who is a fisherman and who could be a fisherman. Because it's really not just an industry or a job or even just a pastime or activity and like way of life for only a select group of like older men. It's really anyone can be involved in the fishery. And I think once we have more diversity, and then we'll see a lot more ways to get people, get food on their plates and get them familiar with fish and being nice to fish too. So yeah, I volunteer as well, like with Fishing for Success and Girls Who Fish with Kimberly. And I talk to the media whenever I can. If someone needs an interview or if an academic needs an opinion, I make myself available. And I just hope that eventually I'll be able to make some positive changes, including changing that legislation. I think is probably the most important thing right now, because that will allow people more freedom to be creative. And of course, also initiatives like this fish market app are really good because we can try it out and see how it's going to work with what we have already legislation wise. And it will help us figure out too what we have to change. So I'm really excited, and hopefully my dad will want to get on board with giving that a try, because where he's the enterprise owner, he's got to do it. So yeah.
Thank you, Jasmine. And we have a question here. People want to know your Twitter handle.
Oh, on Twitter, it's just JNP, so it's my initial, Nadine, 709. And you can put, I can put up a link. And
Yes, perfect. And we also got the Twitter handle for Fishing for Success, so you can see Jasmine's updates and Kimberly's as well. Yes, thank you. Thanks for that, Jasmine. And Keith, would you like to go now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so many good ideas here, and I'd say, yeah, our organization and people didn't get it off the start. I mean, it's representing 10,000 harvesters, primarily, inshore harvesters. So we do what we can to support those people in any way, whether it's health and safety, and obviously trying to ensure that the financial well-being anyway. But I really think we can and should be doing more to increase access to locally caught seafood. It's the reason I'm here right now. And it was just a conversation about the fish market. That application obviously makes sense, whether it's a bricks and mortar place or whether it's doing more the e-commerce. I mean, whatever we can do to promote it, I think we should really be doing it. The FFAW, we were supportive of the changes where a fish harvester could sell it directly to an individual or restaurant. And obviously, if there's things can make it more accessible and is not doing what it's supposed to be doing, well, we should be changing that. We really need to make that easier. There should not be obstacles to that. So I mean that makes sense. One of the big things we do overall is, just kind of try and educate people on the fishery, on the sustainable fish that people have, because people I think are becoming more aware about where it comes from in some ways. Some of our customers, like one of the iconic species we kind of deal with, say cod, and people look at a northern cod stock, for example, and have worries about the sustainability. There's so much information put out there. This stock has grown. It is the second biggest cod stock in the world right now. We're fishing like less than 2% of a very small amount, but there's still, I think, consumers on different scales are led to believe that it's not sustainable. And it's just one of the examples. So we just try to educate people about the value of fishery, the work that people do as much as we can. We have done some work promoting traceability, and I did see a question that came up in the chat. I just got a glimpse of it. We tried to brand the inshore harvesters, some of the fish that we were catching in, it's like on a website, Seafood NL. So we tried to work with some processors, smaller processors, to really brand that, do the traceability, so the end consumer could see exactly who caught it. Obviously the stories of the individuals, their families, talked about, where it went every step of the way. And unfortunately, some of the bigger players in the business are not, not supportive of that. And it's just, without that support, it's really hard, even though there's extra value in that there, whether it's here at home or if it's somewhere else. It's hard to do without all the people in the chain getting on board. So again, we've done some work like the events, working with chefs to promote some of the products, whether that was just locally or with groups of harvesters all across the country. I think that really does make sense. Those events, when you get the champions, like you said, the chefs who are really passionate about what they're working with, and particularly sustainable seafood, and they know where it comes from, they know about who's catching it and have an idea about that. That's some of the advertising you can't really buy. And I just, if people want to know more about the work we do, I just our website, ffaw.ca, or our social media sites to really know a little bit more about who we are and what we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith, and I'm sure we can share that information in the chat as well, so people can connect. I feel like this is a really good opportunity for everyone watching to connect with all the panelists and to follow up on all those different things we've been talking about today. So thank you, Keith, and Kimberly, it's all yours now.
Hello. Like I said, it's great coming in at the end because with a great panel like this, I don't have as much to say, except that ditto. I would like to add, though, that you know, a fishery is fish and people, and we've been hearing so much over the past few months about the fish, especially if we're thinking about cod. You know, the cod report and ITQs and quotas and how the cod are doing and how much we're going to fish or how much we'll be allowed to fish. But we also have to keep in mind that as we're protecting fish for the future, we also need to be able to protect people for the future. And the average age of fish harvesters is almost 60. So how are we going to protect people who will fish in the future? And you know, the farmers are doing things like agriculture in the classroom, little green thumbs, and all these gardens are popping up everywhere, and we're not doing anything comparable for fishing. So we need to start doing something that way. Fishing for Success, of course, has programming, but we can't do it all by ourselves. We have Girls Who Fish, we have Youth Cod Fishery, we have the Fish for Fridays program that gets locally caught Petty Harbor fish that we purchase and bring to downtown St. John's in cooperation with Second Harvest that funds us, and Food First, and we work with local restaurants that prepare the meals, and it gets delivered by community food groups, and or we bring it to food banks or to Choices for Youth, and they feed the young people there, and people connect to their culture through the fish. We've also been working on trying to get fish into our schools because we've heard the discussion here earlier about getting fish into schools and how important that is. Our children should be eating culturally valuable food in their schools. So all of these things are important. So talking about the people. So I'm just going to leave it there because I noticed it's 8 o'clock, and I hope that we still have time for questions, because that's what's really exciting, is to get some questions. So Marella, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. We have this big panel with so many different perspectives. I wanted to invite a lot of people to talk about this because I did want to hear from all your experiences from different sectors, and I think this has been really good and insightful to hear from all the diversity of backgrounds and opinions here. So yes, it's now 8 o'clock, so I apologize to our audience who's here until now, and thank you so much for tuning in and sticking with us here. So we'll now move to some questions. We have a question here in the chat that's very related to the opportunities that we're talking about. So it's from Anna Bury, and she's asking if is there a way to have an awareness campaign for the local fishery that incorporates recipes from local chefs, elders from the indigenous communities, old-time traditions, how to clean, prepare, etc., done in a TV program format. And would anyone like to comment on that?
Well, I'll say something about it, Marella, because you and I have been talking about this very same thing for probably a year now. As I mentioned, Fishing for Success has been doing Fish for Friday for about a year, and each Fish for Friday, where it was a prepared fish meal, the chef has kept the recipe, and so we would have this literal tested recipe that we could put together of Fish for Friday meals. And then we also participated in the Indigenous celebration and helped First Light deliver their feast that was during the first COVID lockdown. And so we have so many different recipes that we've helped people with between the COVID and Snowmageddon and all of that. So this is another poke to get Marilla working on this, we've also worked with Manuel's River and doing some virtual recordings preparing fish stews, and so those are available through their video connections, and so you can see some of those. You can see Leo's traditional fisherman stew there. So all of those are possibilities. I don't know about TV. That might be a little bit more complex, but with all of the miracle of YouTube channels that we have, Fishing for Success has a YouTube channel. We could put them on the YouTube channel if folks are into that kind of thing. So it could be done.
Yeah, those are great ideas, Kimberly, and we should definitely continue talking about like having the recipe book, and there's so many things we can do around recipes and sharing those and getting people connected in that way. Keith, you have a comment?
Yes, I was just trying to think. I think something along those lines would be a great idea, and I know little bits and pieces sometimes. I suppose what we do with members, try to highlight the work that they're doing. Sometimes not so much recipes and things like that. But what came to mind when you said it was there's so many great episodes of Land and Sea, and I think they're all online. I mean, it's not replicating what's there now, but I just thought I'd kind of throw it out there because what came to mind. It'd be great to do more of that right now, and we still hear a lot. We have a program that's primarily around the fisheries, and CBC Radio, the broadcast still talks a lot about the fishery and the people and stuff, and some recipes and culture sometimes. So we do have some things, but there's a great idea, and we'd obviously be supportive of more people that are going to learn more about the fish, the fishery, and obviously the food.
Yes, that's great, Keith. Thank you so much. And Anna Berry followed up on that, saying, please compile a list of local fishers from each region. I personally have no fisher connection, so someone like me would not know when and who to go for in season for different types of fish. I am a future self-employed business person looking for possible connections. So I guess we can see some interest here in finding local fishers to get some fresh fish and seafood from. If anyone would like to comment on that.
Well, I was just going to say this is probably a real good spot for the plug for your own work that you're doing that you talked to me about, Marilla.
Yes.
I mean, we talked about trying to find people, and Jasmine had mentioned talking to her family about it, and I'd say there's some other harvesters who would be interested in something like that. So I'd say keep in touch with the work that you're doing, and we'll try and obviously get some harvesters who are interested in selling locally and everything as well. Again, we're highly kind of susceptible to the seasonality of the fish and everything else, but in season there's certainly options.
Yes, for sure. And yeah, that's an idea that I'm starting out, but we can definitely follow up on that in terms of creating an app to try to connect local consumers to fish harvesters and try to get that that connection going and have more availability of fish and seafood in the market in an easy way. So we have a question from Dan Rubin asking if sales at the wharf are illegal here, and saying that it has become well established in New England. So he's asking if sales are illegal here at the wharf.
So they're not illegal, they're just very restrictive, and with COVID on the go, a lot of wharfs aren't as accessible as they used to be because they are workplaces. So your access to them is even more closed than they might normally be. And if you're, an everyday person and you don't understand the seasonality of the fish, then and you don't know when the boats are coming in or when they're leaving or when the fish is being landed, then that even makes it a little more difficult for you to go down to the wharf and knock on a fishing shed to try to find out if you can purchase some fish. And so that's why Marilla's app that she's talking about, the fish market app, would be really useful for those fishermen who are a little bit tech savvy and can connect up with local people who would follow them on the app, and then they could post and say, hey, I'm at the wharf, I got fish, and you could hopefully just pop down there and get your fish from them. So it's not illegal, it's just there are just some restrictions that make it challenging.
Yeah, thank you, Kimberly. No, that's really good, and good clarification on that. How can we get people to know what they are buying is local? That's a question from Marshall Bursey. Jasmine? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. Can you hear me now? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I think really like the first step would be if we could just simply get more local products into the grocery stores, because it is a bit, I don't know, it seems weird that you have to go somewhere special to get fish. Like you don't have to go to the farmer to his farm or farm to get a potato. So like, if we could just start there and simply just have more products ready to like cook, like if you go to a wharf and you get a fish like codfish, it's like going to have a head on it, and not everyone knows what to do with that. So I think that would be the first step, because I mean, obviously, if you're going to the wharf, it's local, right? But if it's if we can get more in the grocery stores and actually put a nice sticker on it and like explicitly say, and like even if it was caught, sometimes fish is caught in Newfoundland, Labrador, and it's processed like on a factory ship and then maybe gone to China and then shipped back, or what we caught is sent to a local buyer and then it goes to a plant somewhere else. So if they could have like explicit, what the journey of the fish product that you're about to consume, if that could be like on the label, I think that would be cool. And I think people would like that too. It might be like a marketing, like a selling point if they could like really like read a little story about where the fish came from or something like that.
Thanks, Jasmine. That's a great point. Anyone else would like to comment on that, or should we move on to the next question?
I guess just very quickly again, I think that traceability. I think for a lot of reasons that's probably becoming more the way of the world. People want to know that it's whoever's buying that's sustainable for human health reasons now. Even with COVID, we got more demands on trying to figure out where it came from. And some of the stuff we started off promoting it on lobster because you're able to put the tag and it's not processed or sold live. A lot with halibut as well. We tried to do that, and obviously that's great. People can scan it, pick up their phone, and just scan it and find out the story. You know what I mean? It's a pretty commonplace now, but still not enough. And I'd say if Marshall probably would have some ideas on that himself, I would say.
Thank you, Keith. Now we have a question from Andrew Batstone to Hana. When establishing your company in Nova Scotia, what are some examples of challenges you overcame that made your business more feasible?
Yeah, the biggest one for me probably was that we had to get a lot bigger really quickly to make it viable. So we had to invest in becoming CFIA registered processors. Did that in 2016, so 2 years into the business, realized the only way to do this is to get bigger so that you can buy an entire catch, or you can export it so that you can even make it available to locals. And that brought a whole other layer of complexity and difficulty, certainly. But to be able to offer it to locals, you had to have the supply chains. That meant you also had to be exported, which was a bit, of a tricky thing to navigate. I honestly can't think, and it'd be great to know more Newfoundland examples, but in Nova Scotia, I cannot think of a single seafood company that's owned by a young woman that has started from scratch, that hasn't been bought or handed down through the generations. It's not an industry that outsiders get into. And I'm probably a little bit hard-headed, so that helped, but it's not very welcoming to diversity or outsiders, that's for sure. But it takes those types of ideas and people to be able to introduce new ways of doing business and new philosophies. So that's been always a challenge to overcome, that people don't necessarily like people that they don't see themselves as or understand. So that's certainly been challenging, but also really rewarding, because it's opened doors that it wouldn't have otherwise, because people are like, who is this crazy woman? Which that's fun too. But I'd like to see more opportunities created for young people to be able to fish, to be able to be seafood processors, to be able to tell these stories in a different way. Now, I'd love to stay, but at 8.5 months pregnant, skipping through my supper time is like no longer super feasible. So I'm like starving. But I'd love to keep chatting, but my body is no longer my own.
No, thank you so much for joining us, Hana, and I apologize for going over time here. It's just so interesting, and we want to keep talking about these topics and asking all the questions here in the chat. But thank you so much, Hana, and
thanks everybody.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, so we can start concluding here now soon, so we don't keep a lot of people waiting. And thank you so much to all of you panelists too for staying around and continuing this conversation. So maybe I'll ask one final question, and then we can just go around, and if you have any final points, and then we can kind of conclude this panel discussion. And it would be great to stay in touch, and if we have other opportunities in the future to discuss with the public, that would be great. So we had a question that was asked much earlier, so I'm going to ask that one from Angelie. She's asking, is there a mechanism that fishers can raise the fish price or fish value by making efforts on such as fishing methods and handling fish on the fishing boats? Fish branding by fishers, which can increase fishers' income. If no such mechanism, what is preventing that? Also, what are the possible ways of bringing up the small-scale fishers' income in Newfoundland? Isabella and Gabriela after, and then Jasmine. Okay, and then Keith. So Isabella, you can start.
I'll be very brief then, if that's the case. I was just going to quickly say, like a program like Oceanwide Seafood, which is a third-party recommendation body. Oftentimes when we partner with businesses, they then have access to use our branding to market that product, and that kind of opens their product up to different markets and businesses that want to be prioritizing purchasing sustainable seafood options. So that is definitely a mechanism that fishing communities can take if they want to be accessing different markets and maybe even getting a higher cost for their product.
Thank you. And Gabriela now?
Yes, I can answer this by giving this example of Fogo Island fish. So recently I met Taylor McMeekan, and actually I invited him to speak to my class because I was so impressed by, excuse me, by the way they handled this with fishing with hook and line and getting very high quality fish. They are only fishing for cod. So they have now 55 people in their small social enterprise, and they pay them very well because they ask more for fish they sell to high-end restaurants in Ontario and in British Columbia. And so, yeah, I asked Taylor, why don't you come with your beautiful fish to Newfoundland? And he said, I liked his answer. He said, I don't want to compete with fishers in Newfoundland who would be willing to actually start doing what we are doing. So I think that's a very good idea, and I hope Keith is paying attention to this, because I think we should have like another panel discussion with fishers and just make them aware that this is a possibility to open a small business with a very high-end fish caught by hook and line, and this is protecting our stocks, because the stocks of cod are still recovering. So I think it's a beautiful idea, and is also protecting the consumers who are interested in paying more for very good fish.
If I can just quickly jump back in quickly, it was the scientists for the Oceanwide Seafood Program that wrote the small scale fisheries assessment on that subset of the cod fishery in Newfoundland. And Taylor McMeekin is an Oceanwide chef partner, and also so is Fogo Island Fish and Fogo Island Inn. So that's just a really great example actually of marrying together all of these different partners to communicate and promote a really sustainable option and market it in a different place.
Great, thank you, Gabriela, and thank you so much for adding that, Isabella. That's really good to know. I didn't know about that connection, and I talked to Taylor McMeekin just the other day. It's really good. So I can't remember who was next. Was it Keith or Jasmine?
I think
I'll
it was
go if that's okay.
Jasmine. Yep.
So yeah, it is possible for well, the skipper, so the operator owner of the enterprise, the fishing license, to have a little bit more power when it comes to their own income on their own, within their own power. So if you last year we got 89 cents per pound for codfish head on got out. Now I'm not exactly clear on the legislation on if a fisherman is allowed to process that into fillets and sell it. I know some people do, but we don't do that because we're not clear on what's, what we're allowed to do, because the legislation is difficult to interpret. I did my best, but I have no background in that. So, there's a bit, like, for example, I think $4 per pound is what some people do sell their fillets for. So their fillet is the 1/3 of the fish. So there's a smaller profit margin there. But I think it would just be so cool if I could go out and just catch 25 fish and on just by hand line and bring them back and do something with them or sell them whole to someone without being the enterprise owner. That would give me a little bit more freedom to be creative, and it would also broaden the access of fish for some people. It wouldn't really be big enough to make a big difference, but if I had the freedom and felt comfortable and safe, because that is another thing that a lot of harvesters are not, it's really difficult to get information on what's legal and what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do, and it changes per zone and per license. So even within a 5th generation fish harvester, and I still don't have all the answers, and it's difficult to get them sometimes. So yeah, I think there is room there, but we don't know what it is, and definitely changes need to be made to that legislation to give more people access and freedom. So yeah, hope that's a good answer, I think.
Yeah, that's great, Jasmine. Thank you so much. And Keith?
Yeah, well, when I put my hand up there originally, one of the examples that came to mind was what's happening in Fogo, and obviously they have a bit of a unique opportunity with Fogo Island Fish and the work. There's a lot going on with the Fogo Island Inn and that, but they've been able to put it into something where it's obviously the consumers are happy with it. It's gone on for a while. Harvesters in this province, underpaid for cod through a lot of the other channels has been a struggle and a frustration, to say the least. But so that's a good example, and we've tried to, I guess, replicate that for harvesters to bring that value up, like what I mentioned before, the traceability program, the seafood, wild caught seafood from Newfoundland and Labrador. I think it has a lot of, there's a lot of value there, but the partners sometimes are hard to come by because they got their own thing going on, so it's difficult. There was kind of a question about the quality, and I really seen the last number of years people who are fishing are generally really professionals and take a lot of great care with their food. And people who are inshore harvesters are doing, I would say, much better, more focused on quality, generally speaking. And the other thing, replicating that FFAW, there's nothing to stop a group of harvesters to get together themselves to do it. I'd say there's nothing to stop. There's challenges, obviously, like Hannah talked about before in her business, but it can be done. People can do a little bit more of that, and that's with all species. So, yeah, there's lots to talk about.
Yeah, thank you for that, Keith. And Kimberly, you like to say something?
Yes, I did want to mention that there is a community that has been doing a handline fishery, and it's part of the Canada Fisheries Act, and that's Petty Harbour. It actually has been part of the Canada Fisheries Act since 1960 by an act of council. And I've attached a booklet in the chat space that you can look at that we've downloaded to our website. You can also go on MUN's website, and it's part of the archives at MUN also. And the families of the fishing families in Petty Harbour have protected the handline fishery here. That is part of the traditional fishing grounds, 3 miles out and 3 miles north and south of the grounds here, because they felt that it was important in protecting employment for fish harvesters, because they felt that a few wealthy fishermen could literally just choke up the fishing grounds with gill nets. And they also recognized what was becoming early on very apparent about the effects of ghost fishing gear. When gill nets might break loose and then continue to fish without you finding your gear and collecting that fish. So, so that does happen here in Petty Harbour, and that is the biggest reason why Fishing for Success came to Petty Harbour, because that's an important story to tell when teaching children about fishing. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. We're almost half an hour over our time now. So I would love to keep going and continue this conversation. But maybe we can just, if you have any final comments now, then you can somehow summarize some of the things you've learned through this conversation today, or some of the next steps moving forward now. Yes, Kimberly, we all love talking fishing. Love to talk fishing. And maybe as we go around for this any final remarks or final comments, maybe if you want to also keep in mind this question that we got, maybe we can also answer this question in that sense, in terms of how do we avoid this trap of thinking about fishing as marketing? I think that's what Dan Robing is trying to get at. So thinking about fish as a commodity versus fish as food. I believe that's somewhat the point of that comment. So as one of the real challenges, he says, as we realize the destructiveness of treating the world as a collection of products, is to transform food as commodity into realizing it as a gift of nature to be shared in community. So yeah, if anyone has any comments on that, you may add to your final conclusions on this panel discussion.
Just the simple comment that I agree with Dan that it's a gift of nature and we need to treat it a little bit differently from what Gabriela said, that fish and cars are not the same. And so think about marketing as an educational tool and treat it that way.
I'll just quickly say that food is intimate. You pass down a recipe from your grandmother that you feed to your children, and it's something that really connects to you personally. And I think that it's also really important that we kind of decommodify fish and consider food as something that's sacred and important. But not only that, like 56 million people around the world are dependent on seafood industry for their primary form of employment. So like we need to manage these resources in a way that makes sense and connects to its true value as a form of nurturing and sustenance, and also be realistic about needing to be dependent upon these resources for future generations as well. So let's think further ahead, I think is very key. And also this panel was awesome.
Thank you so much, Isabella. And it's really good to have you here today too. It's been really good to hear all your experience with Ocean Wise and all your insights on different aspects of fisheries. So thank you. So who would like to go next? Jasmine, Keith.
I can go. So I don't have a concluding comment on this. I am sure we all agree that fish is food and we need to treat it with more respect than what we have done so far. So I just want to thank Mirella for getting us together, and it was so nice to hear all these perspectives and to see that people who think alike are still available, and this encourages me to keep telling my students the stories of the fish we eat, and we should be more careful with it. And I also want to mention that it was a big surprise to see Kimberly, because I remember when I visited her little store, and she prepared some good cod for us. Remember, Kimberly, that? If you are not so far away, I would be coming with all my students, but you are on the other coast, so unfortunately I cannot do that very easily. Thank you so much.
To visit. Yes, it was a great time. Thank you.
Yes.
We can plan a virtual visit, just like this.
Yes, thank you so much, Gabriela. It's a pleasure to have you here today, and thank you so much for agreeing to be part of this panel. We learn a lot from you, and every time I talk to you, I learn a lot from all your experiences as well in Iceland, in Costa Rica, and all your experience in economics as well, and here at Memorial University. So thank you. Keith, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. And yes, thanks, Mirella. Thanks everybody else. It has been great. It's really interesting. So, you know, a lot of what we would talk about, you know, is about you know, it's about the fish, but the people too, the communities and the connection that people have. And when we're making decisions, obviously, kind of keeping in mind the number of people and who they are. And when we were, you know, preparing for this, it was like, we have a question at the end for the others, and wasn't sure what the question would be. I guess we'd have thought we have all kinds of ideas, but I guess the people who are listening kind of reflect, you know, really what have you done to support the people in local harvesters, local people. Obviously, eating local food can do that, but being aware of the policies and what decisions are being made around the fishery are important too. So I'll leave it at that, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Keith. And I wish we had more time to continue the discussion and ask those questions to other panelists, because I'm sure there's a lot more to talk about. But thank you so much for joining us today as well. Jasmine?
Yeah, just for one last comment, I just want to say thank you so much for including me in this discussion. It means a lot to me that you asked to speak to me and, like, you know, wanted to hear my opinion and took me seriously and stuff like that. So thank you. And thank you to everyone who tuned in and listened. And if there was comments on Facebook, I'll try to get to them later on, probably not tonight, but maybe tomorrow. And I do agree with what Dan has said about the way that we treat and view fish. So it will take a while to shift from this like capitalist mentality, because like right now we do have a lot of people who are dependent on it for financial needs, you know, but fortunately there are lots of ways that we could change our fishery, that the current fish harvesters and new ones too could get involved and still make you know, enough to support themselves and have good food to eat, you know, and selling it to local people. But it will take innovation and it'll take time. So I'm just kind of hoping that with what I'm doing, it's going to help get more people interested in the fishery, to help me diversify it. And with that diversification, When, you know, everyone who's currently working is ready to retire, then there will be like new ideas and stuff like that, instead of just like them lose, like, you know, once, because if, you know, they're gone, there's no one to take over, then that's a huge loss. But if we can get more people involved, then we can definitely work towards making changes that are better for the fish and for everyone to get lots of good food to eat.
Thank you, Jasmine, and it is a pleasure to have you here, and thank you so much. I've been learning so much from you already, and I've only talked to you maybe 3 times now, and I feel like you have so much to teach and so much to talk about your experiences, and I really admire your engagement. I really admire your engagement with Fishing for Success and food sovereignty and now, and I think the work you've been doing is great. So thank you so much.
People get out the door now. My head's gonna get so big.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks everyone. If you have any other comments that you would like to make, feel free to jump in as well. But I would like to thank our partners. So these are some of the people who have been I've been talking to and who have been involved with me in terms of this project, this volunteer project that I've been doing with OceanWise and Ocean Bridge specifically on developing this mobile app for connecting fish harvesters to local consumers. So thanks everyone, and thanks to OceanWise and Ocean Bridge for funding this project, and also for hosting this panel discussion today. So just like a final comment here, we also have a photography contest related to this From Hook to Fork initiative. So anyone is welcome to send your photos. We received many submissions already. Jasmine has sent some photos to me as well. So we're going to have a gallery on our website, and you can vote to your favorite photos. And the winning photos are going to receive some prizes from local community organizations. As well as people who vote for their favorites, they're going to be entered into a prize draw. So now we've extended the deadline to March 26th, so we give more people the opportunity to contribute. And so yeah, I'm really looking forward to that and seeing all the different pictures of along the fish chain that we're going to get. So that's from harvesting to consumption of fish and seafood. So feel free to contribute to that as well. And you can contact us through our website or email. And if you want to talk to any of the panelists, you can also contact me through the fishmarketapp.com, and I'll make sure I'll get in touch with them and answer any other questions. So yes, I think that's all. If anyone else has anything to add, feel free to jump in, but I believe that's all for today. Thank you for joining, for all the participants who have been here with us for 2 hours now. Yeah, so this has been great.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Night.
Thank you. Good night.
Everybody.
Bye. Thanks for joining.